Hi guys, welcome to the first ever Earthly Delights podcast, but this is a mini podcast. It's an intro podcast where we're just going to be telling you about podcasts in general, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we've met, and the format of this podcast so you know a bit more about us and what to expect in the future. So I'm going to pass you on to my good friend Jim O'Connell, who is also the co-host of the Earthly Delights podcast. Take it away, Jim.
How's everybody doing? I guess basically that what happened was we were just having chats. If I remember correctly, tell me if I'm wrong. We were just having some chats, and then you brought up the idea of actually trying to record these chats or setting up some sort of podcast. And I couldn't think of one good
Yeah,
reason.
because I'm an egocentrical idiot.
And because you wanted to spread the good word. That's all.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Pure intentions, I promise.
That's exactly what it was. And yeah, I couldn't think of a good reason not to do it. So yeah, and it meant that like another reason was because obviously we live in two different countries. I thought it would be another good way for us to keep in stronger touch. And yeah, just another good reason for us to seek interesting conversations if we weren't already doing
And how would you describe the podcast? Like, what would you say that we're going to be talking about? I'm waiting for you to say the word holistic at some point.
it. I definitely want I want the approach of the podcast to be somewhat holistic. I want people to hear a variety of conversations, but kind of just conversations that they can relate to. Um, yeah, I, I tell me out here, Seth.
All right. Well, at least the plan was anyway. We'll see if we keep to the plan. But the plan
Right.
was, as you can see on the website, guys, go visit it, theearthlydelightspodcast.com. Basically, it's kind of a podcast about mental health, well-being, personal growth, and just two guys who are trying to learn from life's lessons, what life has taught us at our tender age, and what it's going to teach us in the future, and just kind of reflecting on that, and just if we can have interesting conversations with myself, Jim, and I, and also we're going to have guests on to get different types of perspectives on it, and just something so that people have a podcast where there's younger people talking about these kind of sensitive topics, because I think we realized through a lot of the podcasts that we'd listened to, although they'd been useful, a lot of them were they were hosted by older people who maybe had more life experience, which to some extent obviously makes sense, but it also means that they were somewhat less relatable in some circumstances, when they're talking about the hardships of having kids and this and that and the other and dealing with the pressures of a mortgage and so on and so forth. Well, people at the age of 23, at least the majority of us, can't really relate to those kind of topics, so we thought there was a bit of a space there where maybe people would be more interested, well, younger people anyway, would be more interested in listening to people more of their age who maybe will be experiencing similar things. So I think that's the kind of intent of the podcast. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it was a beautiful summary.
Mate, what can I say? I'm just professional. Um, no, and then just to like give a bit of background on how this podcast is going to go going forwards. The idea was obviously, as Jim's alluded to, I live in Madrid and Jim lives he's currently in Denmark, but he is a Dublin native. So it's hard for us to do these in person. So what we've been doing is we're going to release one podcast where it's just Jim and I, and then we're going to release a podcast with a guest. So it'll either be myself interviewing a guest of ours or Jim. And then if we're in person together, then obviously the ideal would be to interview a guest, together, Jim and I and someone else. But if not, then it would just be Jim with a guest or myself with a guest. And Jim kind of came to that decision. I think he made the right decision because, like we said, these are intimate, fairly deep conversations, and we didn't feel it was right for people to have these conversations with either myself or Jim phoning in. We didn't feel people would feel comfortable enough, so we've recorded a few now, and the way it's going to go is we'll release a podcast with just Jim and myself, and then we'll release one with a guest, and then it'll be one with Jim and myself, and then another one with a guest, so on and so forth, and we'll just keep on going like that. And they'll be released every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks you'll get a new podcast, and they are going to be available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud. YouTube, Spotify, whatever you want. I'll get a
Bebo.
Raven to deliver them. Bebo, it's all good. MySpace, MSN chat, wherever you want it, it's there. So, so there's no excuse for you guys not to listen. And then yeah, I suppose we should just give them maybe a bit of background to who we are and how we've met, because apart, if there is anyone who's listening to this who isn't actually one of our friends who we forced to listen to this, then they may have no idea who we are. So Jim, do you want to give a bit of the background story
Of our friendship.
of our friendship, of yourself? Just let people in.
Yeah, I guess I grew up in Dublin, and after I finished my bachelor's, I went traveling. I went to Australia for 6 months, spent some time in Southeast Asia, and but I've always been interested in learning about things that aren't particularly in my circle, I guess, or just learning, like pushing myself to learn things that are quite new to me. And I think it was 2016 where I undertook a Italian. Um, well, we would teach English in Italy for 6 weeks, and that's where I met you, Seb. And that was a magnificent trip, and we've kept
A
in touch
life-changing
since.
moment.
Life-changing moment. And since then, yeah, I guess I've continued to travel a good bit, and yeah, I've just been really interested in having furthering these discussions, and so has Seb, and I think that's how our friendship has blossomed and how we want the podcast to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, background to myself. I'm a bit of a nomad, been moving around constantly. So I grew up in Hampshire, then moved to Lincolnshire, studied in Leeds University, and then moved out to Madrid. But I'm half Italian, half English, so that explains how we met in Italy. And ever since then, we've just kind of kept in contact. We worked out that we've been friends for maybe 4 years, 5 years, and we've met each other the grand total of 4 times. We've probably spent about 2 weeks of actual time together. But yet somehow we still keep on wanting to call each other and text each other and have these weird, deep conversations. And so we thought, well, fuck it, we might as well just record them. And if people want to listen, then brilliant. So if you're one of these people now, we thank you for supporting us. And we just would like to say, bear with us, because we're going to make mistakes along the way. This is a trial and error process for us. But we appreciate your patience, and we plan to get better as we go on. And that's it, really. I can't think of anything more that we want to say in this little intro, apart from just thanking people for supporting us and tuning in, really.
Also, guys, we'd really appreciate it if you made any recommendations about what me and Seb can talk about in the future, possible guests, all of that. Yeah, we're really open, and want to provide a an interesting and evolving podcast for you guys.
All right, perfect. So you have our gratitude already, and we hope you enjoy the podcast. So the first podcast is already out, and that's called Mother and Father, where we talk about Jim's mum and my newly divorced parents. And then we've also released a second podcast just so you can get a bit of a feel for what it's like when we interview guests, and that's with my good friend Rosie Dowsing, who is an award-winning journalist, and we talk about her documentary which is called Fathers on Edge, and it's just about how fathers may sometimes are neglected in the pregnancy process, and how that can lead to actual postnatal depression and so on and so forth for fathers themselves, and how there are now fathers taking action and making a change in their world now, and they're not waiting for policy changes or policy makers. So that was a really interesting conversation. And then from then on, we will be releasing podcasts fortnightly. But until then, we hope you enjoy and we hope you have a good one. See you soon, guys.